Good afternoon, everyone. As Mel mentioned, my name is Pat. And yes, I live here in Melbourne. I'm currently the CTO of the mental health-focused social enterprise Limber, and we're focused on making mental health care more acceptable and accessible. Now, this is going to be a little subtle, but perhaps you'll pick up on the accidental pattern that I'm using in my presentation. Oh, too fast. Particularly in the title, Power and the Passion. All right, I don't want to overdo it. And my clicker's not, okay, there we go. On a more serious note, I would like to begin by acknowledging that this event takes place on the occupied land of the Wurundjeri people, who are part of the Kulin Nation. I greatly appreciated the welcome to country from Elder Ron Jones to kick off the conference, because we haven't been very good at listening to or learning from the oldest living culture in the world. And this morning's welcome is just a small marker to increase our awareness. So I pay my respects to all elders past and present, and to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people here today. Now, when I've given this talk in the past, it's mostly been overseas where there are relatively few Australians. So most of the audience aren't familiar with such acknowledgements. They also, unlike Mel, don't spot the fact that my talk's name is stolen from the title of a Midnight Oil song. The Oils. I'm thinking the audience here may be slightly more familiar with them, but if you haven't got the reference, don't worry. I'm not going to be delving any further into their back catalogue, and I'm certainly not going to start dancing like Peter Garrett. No. Because rather than rock music, I'm going to be talking about something completely different. Instead, my focus will be on open source and its strengths and weaknesses, to discuss whether it's sustainable and how we can improve things. Now, I do realize that the term open source is used in many ways, but I don't want to get caught up in semantics. So maybe we take the definition from opensource.org, probably a good place. And they say that open source software is software that can be freely used, changed, and shared in modified or unmodified form by anyone. Not bad, not bad. Although I am a fan of Nadia Eghbal's preferred definition, which is that modern open source is about building and collaborating in public. I like that one. But it is a bit more focused on the how rather than the what. See, at every level of what we do, we rely on open source software. Our text editors are open source. Our programming languages are open source. Our gems, our package managers, our web servers, and most of our production operating systems, they're all open source. But why? Why do we use all these different pieces of open source software? Well, through them, we get to stand on the shoulders of some pretty smart giants. Using open source software gives us an amazing productivity boost. There are so many things that we don't need to build that we actually need, so it saves us a hell of a lot of time. Of course, it is software, so it's not perfect. But when things break, we at least have the option of trying to fix them ourselves. And honestly, it also saves us a lot of money. It also, though, can provide a sense of community. Groups of people working together, helping each other. The collaboration aspect that Nadia has referenced is a key part of the ecosystem. All in all, open source is a source, no pun intended, of great power for our industry and for all of us as individual software developers. And the fact that this has been done together a massive effort of collaboration, crossing borders and beliefs, is wonderful. And developers around the world have built all of these things, not because they had to, well, although sometimes they did, and not because they were paid to, although thankfully sometimes they were, but because they wanted to. Creating things is a source of joy for many of us. And problem solving too can be a lot of fun. And many pieces of open source software come from scratching our own itches, solving our own problems. What that means, though, is that open source software is often built in our own spare time. And that's fine because, well, code is more than our work. Code is our passion. Okay, maybe that's not always the case. And I'm well aware that passion is a problematic term when mixed with work. I'm also aware that many of us maybe have not contributed to the open source ecosystem, and that's okay. I've gone searching for statistics. I haven't had much luck, but it wouldn't surprise me if no more than 10% of all developers have ever written any open source code. And again, that is completely understandable and fair. I mean, some of us have kids to look after. Some of us have second jobs to work because we're not all earning Silicon Valley money. Some of us just have other commitments. And some of us just aren't quite sure how. Not everyone has the expertise, right? And contributions require time, understanding, and energy, and having all three of those in the same moment is a tough ask, and even more so when it's not your own project. And then there are bigger cultural problems at play as well, as this quote from Sarah May reflects. When it comes to finding time, most people aren't paid to work on open source, so again, it usually needs to be from our own spare time. And that is not a privilege that everyone has. Now, yes, I am using the word privilege deliberately here. Privilege is not a bad thing, but it must be acknowledged. It must be recognized so we can adapt accordingly. This open source privilege is why relying on GitHub profiles and activity metrics for hiring judgments is flawed. I mean, we know that many people aren't in a position to contribute to open source, so using contributions as a metric for determining who is a good developer is a really bad idea. And on top of that, we know that the tech industry has a diversity problem. Right? It's clear at most dev events, even this one, although things are getting better. In some ways, our focus on open source contributions, an area dominated by privileged white men, only exacerbates that problem. We give away our hard work and our valuable time for free. For free. Like, truly the very height of privilege. But there's a bit more to it than that. I mean, here in Australia, whether you like it or not, we live in a capitalist society. And writing open source software does not pay the bills, for most of us at least. So giving away our hard work and our valuable time for free is inherently a political action. And if you look back at the history of our industry, perhaps this political aspect to open source isn't so surprising. The GNU public license, the GPL, which has been around since 1989, a little while, mandates that any code you write that uses or is a modification of GNU licensed code must also be released under the GNU license. Essentially, everything GNU code touches must also be GNU code, a free software virus, if you like. And that's not a bad thing. It's not necessarily a good thing either, but it is their goal. It's what they want, right? The goal of GNU is that it should be free to view, modify, and redistribute all the source code for all the software in all the world. And then as an interesting juxtaposition, I guess. In some countries, particularly in the US, but also here in occasions, there is lobbying to increase the minimum wage and for things like internships to always be paid. And indeed, like, people should definitely be paid fairly for their time and their effort, but open source software is different somehow. Maybe because most of us are already well paid. But again, that privilege is just shining on through. Giving away our code for free is only part of the problem, because as well as freely sharing our own code, we use others' code as well, and we rely upon it. And not just code either, but APIs and services. Tools like RubyGems, NPM, Homebrew, apt. And while the open source code behind those services are free, the servers required to run them are not. So I don't know who's installed Bundler in the last little while, you might know this stat, but for everyone else, the servers and infrastructure for RubyGems cost upwards of $25,000 US per month. And that figure does not include developer time required to maintain those servers. And that distinction is important. Because when we rely on these services, we're not just expecting people to spend their time on writing code, but also on support, right? Answering questions, patching security issues, and with tools like RubyGems, upgrading servers and keeping them secure. We definitely want people doing these things. I guess for those of us who do end up running such services, this is the joy that comes from having the right combination of skill and luck to build something, a gem, a service, that others start relying upon. It's also worth recognizing the emotional labor involved in supporting open source projects. If you're not familiar with the idea of emotional labor, it is when people manage their own feelings as part of their work, which is particularly common in service roles, serving people in shops and restaurants, on the phone, at a convention center, and so on. And open source maintainers face this effort too in their interactions with others via support requests and patches, and they are fairly expected to be polite and helpful, even in the face of rudeness and impatience. Oh wait, this is the internet, that's not going to be a problem. And in our industry, just like in society more broadly, we're often terrible at recognizing and appreciating this emotional labor. You'll often see open source described with the label free as in speech, rather than free as in beer. But I think the more appropriate label that was first suggested by Jacob Thornton of Bootstrap is free as in puppy, which I feel gives a much better indication of the energy and commitment required to contribute to the community in this way. Now, these are broad strokes that I've been laying down. There are, of course, caveats and exceptions. I mean, we do have some companies that pay their employees to work on open source. Thank you. We have companies who pay maintainers directly for support and new features. Thank you. And we even have companies who pay for the servers required for these services. Thank you. This is all greatly appreciated. Still, many of these open source services have become critical infrastructure for our own work. They are incredibly important. We expect them to always be there working, and yet we don't pay for them. I wonder, do we value open source work less because we don't pay for it? Now, there is other infrastructure in our everyday lives away from the keyboard that we rely upon as well. Right? Things like roads, welfare systems, government, hospitals. And we do pay for those, albeit indirectly, through our taxes. So, bear with me, but should we be paying a Ruby tax? Now, I'm not suggesting that everyone should pay to use these systems. Right? There is most definitely value in keeping things free. We want to keep that barrier of entry as low as possible for anyone who is trying to learn how to code. But if everything's free for everyone, then the good times aren't going to last. 2 quotes from Nadia Egbal. Again, she's been writing so much great stuff on these topics for the past year. I'll include a link at the end to her fine work. Definitely recommend you check it out. But this idea of a Ruby tax. Well, I mean, look, tax systems allow for some people to pay and not others, right? Those who don't earn a large amount of money, they don't have to pay tax. And those who do earn a lot, well, then they do pay tax. Well, unless they spend their money on sneaky accountants and lawyers instead, I don't know. The organization Ruby Together, I hope many of you are familiar with, is perhaps the closest thing we currently have to a Ruby tax. And Andre, I mean that in the nicest possible way. You sign up as a member, you pay a monthly fee, and all those funds are pooled together and they go towards maintenance, support, and new features for Bundler and Ruby Gems and other critical Ruby infrastructure. And that is just one approach to improving the sustainability of our industry. There are other possibilities. You can pay for pro editions of gems like Sidekick, or you could pay open source maintainers directly for support, or perhaps investigate micropayment systems like GitTip and so on. Sorry, you probably weren't expecting to think about money and taxes today, were you? And I know I am harping on a bit about the financial side of things, but let's be clear. This is just one part of a broader picture. I mean, the overarching goal, I feel, and I hope you agree, is to have a sustainable ecosystem for our industry. Currently, it's not unfair to say that what we've got now has been built on the broken and burnt out minds of once passionate developers. Lindsay Bieta put forward some excellent thoughts on this topic onto Twitter about a year ago. This is just some of what she had to say. Here's a bit more. Again, a link at the end for the full thread. But let's be clear, this is not a financial problem. It is a cultural problem. Wait, that shouldn't be singular. These are cultural problems. There is, unfortunately, more than one. So let's recap. We have an open source ecosystem that is built on top of privilege. And again, that privilege isn't bad. The fact that it underpins everything is the problem. And we have become entitled. We are so used to not paying for anything or valuing people's time and labor. And this entitlement leads to contributor burnout, as made clear here by Aaron last year on Twitter. And our collective entitlement has also led us to rely upon everyday infrastructure that we don't pay for. All the bad news. Sorry. But don't despair. There are ways forward. There are good and happy things. I mean, we do have many large, successful businesses who support open source software financially. Companies like Heroku and GitHub and many others. Thank you very much to them. And in the Ruby community, as I've already mentioned, we are very lucky to have Ruby Together, looking after Ruby Gems and Bundler and other such important tools. And then we also have programs like Rails Girls Summer of Code, which quite clearly helps to tackle the lack of diversity in our industry. But also by paying women to work on open source, I think it addresses the privilege inherent in the ecosystem as well. But we can't just step back and applaud these groups for their fine work. I mean, it is fine work and we should applaud them, don't get me wrong, but we also need to roll up our sleeves. We need to contribute as well. So for those of you here who lead development teams, or maybe even run your own companies, please get your organization to support the groups I've mentioned or others like them financially. You are most definitely getting value out of their hard work, so it'd be nice to chip back a little bit as well. Alongside that, it would be wonderful if you could allow your team to work on open source projects on company time. It doesn't have to be a day a week or anything so grand. I know there are so many demands on your time, but we need to reinforce the fact that the open source ecosystem is a shared platform and deserves some attention from as many developers as possible. Now, if I jump back to to one of my original quotes from Nadia, talking about open source, both building and collaborating, I think we're doing okay at the building. It's not perfect, but I think we've got that one sussed. The collaborating, on the other hand, I think there's room for particular improvement there. So for anyone here who maintains open source projects, there are some great opportunities here for you to move the needle a little bit as well. I highly recommend being a little more active in seeking out contributions. I mean, part of why maintainers become burnt out is because we're not so good at sharing the load, and I definitely speak from experience here. So investing a bit of time and effort into making it easier for others to help you is probably worth it in the long run, especially if your project is somewhat popular. There was also an excellent blog post from Charlotte Spencer on this topic, and for those of you who were here at the conference last year, you would have seen Ellie Meredith speaking on the topic of feedback, which, while aimed at software teams, also was just filled with value and wisdom that I think is immediately applicable for working on open source collaboration. And I'll share links to both at the end if you haven't seen them. But if we jump back to my statistic, okay, let's be fair, my vague estimate, that only 10% of developers already contribute to open source, right? I've been making a lot of suggestions that are more focused on that 10%. So what advice can I offer to everyone else? Firstly, it's worth acknowledging that helping out can be daunting, especially if it's your first time. It can be scary. So try searching for the low-hanging fruit. Things as simple as, when you find a bug, write a nice detailed bug report. Or if you find the docs are lacking, send a patch through to improve them. Both extremely valuable. There's also the tool Your First PR, created by Charlotte Spencer, who I just mentioned, which is a great way to keep an eye on things you might be able to contribute to, even if you're just beginning. But mostly, don't be afraid to start something. I'm not going to promise that you'll finish it. Right? It's scary, you might get distracted, whatever. But at the very least, I think you'll learn something. And that is incredibly valuable to you and the community. And look, I know all these are just small steps, right? And they're also pretty much all related to contributions. And yet earlier, wasn't I making the point that having a strong focus on contributions is unhealthy? I think I was. And I still believe that. And just, it's really tough to get the right balance between all these different factors. It's really tricky. Because, and maybe it's obvious, I don't know what the answers are. I wish I could stand here and give you a definitive solution and solve everything. But these are big cultural changes. And big cultural changes are hard. Now, don't get me wrong, I really do still believe in open source. It's just, well, here's an analogy that may help. I think most of us are familiar with the idea of technical debt, where you take shortcuts to get code working now, but those shortcuts make looking after the code later far more difficult. A friend of mine, Didier Elzinger of Culture Amp, has appropriated that concept and come up with diversity debt. So when building a company, again, you might rush things. You might hire only privileged white men because they're so easy to find. Or instead, you can put in the effort. You can create a company with an inclusive culture. You can be thoughtful about your hiring practices. And you can work hard at building diverse teams. In both of these contexts, to do things well and to avoid such debts requires actively thinking about the best ways forward and then acting accordingly. In a similar fashion, what we've got here in the broader open source community is, okay, well, yes, we've definitely got a diversity debt, for sure, but we've also got a sustainability debt. We have moved fast. We have built very cool things, but our foundations are shaky. And just like with technical debt, there's only so far you can go with shaky foundations. So it's time to start refactoring. It's time to start paying down some of that debt. Now, knowing what the problems are is a key step to finding the solutions. And this is a big part of why I wanted to give this talk, to get your wonderful and intelligent minds thinking about these problems, if you weren't already, and to see what solutions you can suggest. I want you to ponder. I want your perspectives. Awareness is a powerful thing. It helps us to be more empathetic. It helps us to be more compassionate. And I hope you have a little more awareness now about our community and how we work and what we do. And I look forward to hearing your contributions in this journey towards making open source, our industry, and our community more sustainable. Thank you very much for listening. Have an amazing conference. The link there I'll tweet. Have fun.